There's something inherently modern about the sound of a drive-thru, the crackle of a speaker box, the idling engine of a hatchback, the hiss of an espresso machine steaming oat milk. It is a soundscape of convenience. It is transient. It is safe. When you pull up to a window to grab a latte, you are engaging in a ritual of the 21st century that feels completely detached from history. You don't expect to be sitting on a battlefield. You certainly don't expect to be ordering your coffee in a room where men once plotted the death of a king. But if you drive to the industrial outskirts of Sheffield, England, past the retail parks and the gray ribbons of asphalt, you will find a building that defies this logic. It sits on Attercliffe Common like a stone-faced elder judging the modern world around it. It has gables. It has mullioned windows. It has walls of stone so thick they have survived arson, war, and demolition. This is Carbrook Hall. Today it is a Starbucks, but for 400 years it has been a fortress, a home, a rough-and-ready public house, and, according to everyone who has ever stepped inside, a prison for the dead. This isn't just a story about a ghost in a coffee shop. This is a story about the English Civil War, a colonel who refused to leave his post, and a renovation that woke something up. This is the story of the United Kingdom's most haunted Starbucks. To understand why a global coffee chain inherited a poltergeist, we have to peel back the layers of paint. We have to turn off the pop music playing over the speakers and listen to the silence in the oak room. Because long before the baristas were writing names on cups, a man named Colonel John Bright was writing the fate of Sheffield in blood. The year was 1644. England was tearing itself apart. The Civil War was raging between the Royalists, those loyal to King Charles I, and the parliamentarians, the Roundheads, led by Oliver Cromwell. It was a time of muddy, brutal skirmishes and neighbor turning against neighbor. In Sheffield, the Royalists held the mighty Sheffield Castle. They seemed impenetrable. But just down the road at Carbrook Hall, the resistance was gathering. The hall was owned by the Bright family, staunch parliamentarians. John Bright was a young, fiery, military mind. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a zealot for his cause. He turned his family home into a headquarters. Imagine the Oak Room as it was then. Not filled with laptops and students, but thick with pipe smoke and the smell of wet wool and damp leather. Maps of the castle spread out on heavy timber tables. Colonel Bright and his men, pacing the floorboards, plotting the siege that would eventually bring the Royalist stronghold to its knees. That room, the Oak Room, is still there. It is the heart of the Starbucks. When you walk in, the atmosphere changes. The air feels heavier, denser. The intricate wood paneling that surrounds you is the same wood that absorbed the shouts of men preparing to die. The plaster ceiling, with its ornate, twisting vines, is the same ceiling that looked down on the Roundheads as they cleaned their muskets. Historians tell us that Colonel Bright was a man of intensity. He was driven. And in the world of the paranormal, intensity is like a battery. It charges the walls. It leaves a residue. When Colonel Bright died, his body was buried, but many believe his authority never left Carbrook Hall. He is the primary resident. He is the shadow that stands at the top of the stairs, watching the new tenants with a critical eye. But he isn't alone. For decades before the green siren logo went up above the door, Carbrook Hall was a pub. And it wasn't a gentle countryside tavern. It was a notorious, rough-edged drinking hole in the middle of Sheffield's industrial heartland. It was the kind of place where stories were swapped over pints of dark ale, and where every landlord had a story about the Colonel. During the pub years, the activity was aggressive. Landlords would report bottles flying off the shelves, not falling, but being thrown across the room by unseen hands. Heavy beer barrels would be moved in the cellar. One manager reported seeing a dark, cloaked figure standing in the doorway of the bar, blocking the light, only to dissolve into mist when approached. There were other figures, too. The 1920s woman. Locals call her the Old Lady. She is often seen sitting in a rocking chair that isn't there anymore or appearing in the mirrors of the bathrooms. She seems less angry than the Colonel, more confused, a remnant of a different era of the building's domestic life. And then there are the children. This is perhaps the most unsettling detail reported by the pub staff. In the dead of night, after the last patron had stumbled home, the staff would hear the distinct, impossible sound of children laughing. Running footsteps on the upper floors that were empty and locked. Sometimes a baby's cry would echo from the kitchen walls. It was a place so active that many locals refused to go to the toilet alone. It was a place where the boundary between the living and the dead felt paper thin. Then came the decline. As the industry in Sheffield changed, the pub struggled. It closed its doors. It sat empty. And in 2018, it nearly died. Arsonists targeted the building. Fire, the great destroyer, licked at the ancient stone walls. It seemed like Carbrook Hall was destined to become just another pile of rubble, another ghost story, lost to time. But then, a savior appeared from the most unlikely place. Starbucks. When the announcement was made that the historic Grade 2 listed hall would become a drive-thru coffee shop, there was an outcry. Purists were horrified. They thought it was a desecration of history. But the developers made a promise. They would build the modern drive-thru element on the side, but they would restore the historic core. They would save the oak room. They would keep the paneling. They would respect the bones of the house. And they did. In 2019, the doors reopened. The smell of stale beer was replaced by the smell of roasted Arabica. The sticky carpets were gone. It was clean, it was corporate, it was bright. But you cannot renovate a ghost. Almost immediately after opening, the new Starbucks staff, young baristas, many of whom knew nothing of the Civil War or Colonel Bright, began to report the exact same phenomena that the pub landlords had seen for 50 years. Imagine you are a 20-year-old barista closing up shop. It's 9:30 p.m. The drive-thru is quiet. You are wiping down the espresso machine, and suddenly, a bag of coffee beans flies off the shelf behind you. It lands in the middle of the floor. You put it back. 10 minutes later, it happens again. Staff reported the heavy automatic doors, opening and closing by themselves, triggered by nothing. They heard the sound of furniture dragging across the floor in the oak room when the room was empty. And, chillingly, they heard the children. The giggles, the footsteps, the feeling of being watched from the mezzanine. It became such an open secret that the store manager didn't try to hide it. Corporate didn't try to hide it. In a move that is almost unheard of for a major multinational brand, Starbucks acknowledged the haunting. They didn't issue a denial. They didn't silence the staff. In 2022, they went a step further. They commissioned an investigation. This is where the story shifts from folklore to evidence. Starbucks invited a professional paranormal team, Ghosts of Britain, led by investigators Lee and Lindsay Steer, to spend the night in the store. This wasn't a couple of kids with a flashlight. This was a team equipped with thermal cameras, EMF meters, and high-grade audio recorders. They set up their command post in the Oak Room, the very room where the siege of Sheffield was planned. The investigation began quietly, but as the night deepened, the equipment started to light up. The EMF meters, which detect fluctuations in electromagnetic fields, often associated with spirit manifestation, went wild in the center of the room, far from any electrical wiring. But it was the audio evidence that changed everything. During an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon session, where investigators call out to the spirits and record the silence, hoping for a response, they asked the room about its history. They asked who was there. Reviewing the audio, they found a voice. It was a rough, breathless whisper, but it was distinct. It didn't say "get out." It didn't say a name. It said, "The siege." Think about the implications of that. A residual haunting might play back the sound of a battle, clashing swords, cannon fire. But an intelligent response? A voice that specifically references the defining historical event of the building's existence? That suggests awareness. It suggests that whoever or whatever is in Carbrook Hall remembers exactly why they are there. They remember the war. The investigators also focused on a specific chair in the corner of the room. The thermal cameras picked up temperature anomalies, cold spots that moved. They communicated with what they believed to be the female spirit, the old lady. They described her as friendly, a stark contrast to the heavy, militaristic energy of the colonel. She seemed to enjoy the company. She seemed to like the life that the coffee shop had brought back to her home. Lee and Lindsay Steer concluded their investigation with a bold statement. They declared the Carbrook Hall Starbucks to be, without a doubt, the most haunted Starbucks in the UK. This declaration made national news. It wasn't in the tabloids, it was in the Yorkshire Post and on the official Starbucks EMEA newsroom. It validated centuries of local legend. So what are we to make of this place? We live in a world that tries to sanitize the past. We pave over battlefields. We turn castles into luxury hotels. We turn roundhead hideouts into drive-thrus. We try to make everything consumable, clean, and uniform. But Carbrook Hall refuses to be sanitized. You can put up the menu boards. You can install the Wi-Fi. You can serve the pumpkin spice lattes. But you cannot scrub the history out of the stone. The colonel is still there. He is still pacing the floorboards of the oak room, waiting for news from the front lines. He is still fighting a war that ended almost 400 years ago. The next time you find yourself in Sheffield, maybe you'll stop for a coffee. You'll pull into the drive-thru, and you'll see the old stone wing jutting out from the modern extension. You might grab your drink and decide to sit inside for a minute. If you do, go to the oak room. Run your hand along the 17th century paneling. Look up at the ceiling. And listen. Don't listen for your order number. Listen for the heavy tread of boots. Listen for the whisper of a strategy meeting. Listen for the giggling of children who shouldn't be there. And if your coffee cup slides an inch across the table on its own, or if the air suddenly turns freezing cold, don't panic. Just nod your head. Acknowledge the colonel. You are a guest in his headquarters, and he has been